us the first chapter on bees, perhaps a year ago. And he's back today to give us chapter 2. Sam.
Good morning. Well, I don't know about chapter 2. I thought I'd start this morning telling you a little bit of my history as far as honeybee goes. Not the honeybees, my history. I grew up on a farm over in Allegheny County. We were probably poor, but we didn't know it. And my father occasionally kept bees, but it wasn't a consistent thing. But our neighbors on the farm across the road, Edith and Leon Hill, elderly couple, they kept bees in the hedgerow all the time I was growing up. And I spent a lot of time with Edith and Leon because they had no children. And I got a lot of attention. And they made their own hives, and they made frames that were like this, which is far larger than the normal frame today. But it was a fascination, and I followed the normal path that we see today that's repeated again and again in beekeeping. A person is exposed at a young age to honeybees and beekeeping. Then you start getting into dating, you start going to college, you start having children, and you sort of have other interests that take you away from beekeeping. But then as all those things pass, and they do, you come back to it like in middle-aged or a little older, which I did. I've now been at it the second time, or maybe the first time, for 40 years. And I have never ceased to be amazed by these astonishing insects. The other pollinators will step up. It's much more serious than that. All of the pollinators worldwide are declining. At the end of World War II, we had roughly 6 million colonies of honeybees in the United States. Today, the best estimates are 2.25 to 2.5 million. We're down 50% since the World War II, which was 70 years ago. There are many reasons. There's not any one particular single one that stands out, but after World War II, we started mono-agriculture, where instead of a few acres of one crop, you've got thousands of acres of the same crop. And the bees suffer from that. For example, the almonds in California is a 3-week pollination period in February. Every commercial beekeeper in the United States that can get to California in February take their bees and go to California because that's where they make their money. There's last year they were so desperate they were accepting any colonies that they could get their hands on, whether or not they had more than a few frames of actual bees in them. Speaking of frames, up until 1851-52, bees were kept in straw schleps. Have you all seen, the museums have them. They're like a dome made out of straw. That was what they kept bees in up till Reverend Langstroth developed the movable frame. And the schleps, to get the honey out, you had to basically kill the bees. They'd smoke them out and set fire to the straw. And would get at the honey that way. And at that point, they would encourage swarming because that's the only way they could really keep their bees was to let them swarm a time or two to get an additional colony. And then they would go after the old one and burn up the schlep to get to the honey. Reverend Langstroth in 1851 or 52 developed the movable frame hive, which is similar to what we have today. And without that innovation, we would still be using the schleps, I'm afraid. Now, talk a little bit about the honeybees themselves. There are three types of bees in a colony. There is the queen, there are the workers, and there's the drones. And each one has their own unique function in the colony. And you have to look at the colony as a living entity. You take one part out and the rest will fold eventually. So it isn't like, well, the queen is the most important, the workers are the most important, or the drones are the most important. It's the whole thing. It's sort of like our own fabric of life. There is no one thing or one person or one animal or one insect that doesn't affect all of us in some way. I'll start with the queen because everybody wants usually to hear about the queen. The queen is a female, though the Germans in their unique masculine society for many years up until the mid-1800s, they thought it was the colonies were led by an emperor until one German beekeeper said, well, if it's an emperor, the emperor is laying eggs. And the queen is made by the bees. The bees are all, except for the drones, are all female. The workers are all female. The queen is a female. And when the bees decide it's time for a new queen, they prepare a special cell. I may have one on that frame down there. We'll show you a little later. And that cell is a little bit bigger and a little bit more elongated, and they will hopefully get an egg that's under 3 days old to put in there, and that will become a queen. They will bombard that larva, well, it's in the larval stage. They'll bombard it with royal jelly, which is a mixture that the bees make from honey, pollen, and their own regurgitation. But it's a very potent feed for the queen, and they give her almost exclusively royal jelly all through the larval period, which is 6-7 days. And then they seal the cell, and it goes through a metamorphosis into a queen. That takes a total from the time that the day the egg is laid. Then the bees' eggs are they look at the bottom of the cell like a little grain of rice that's standing upright when it's first laid. And then during the course of 3 days, this egg will slowly twist down and will be, at the end of 3 days, is laying in almost a fetal position in the bottom of the cell, and the egg hatches into a larvae. And it then immediately just almost explodes within a couple days. It's filling the entire cell with the larvae. It's pure protein. I've never eaten any of larvae, but people say it's pretty good that have them. But anyway, after the egg is hatched, if it's a queen, she'll be fed a lot of royal jelly, and then the cell is sealed, and on the 16th day, the queen will emerge. And 16 days, then that's 16 days from the laying of the egg. The queen is just a very different bee from the rest, in that when she first hatches, she's the fastest bee, a virgin queen. If you're looking for a virgin queen, as Peter can tell you, you're looking for a bee, the fastest bee on the comb. She is just speeding around the comb. And being an insect, she has an ectoskeleton, and it's sort of wet when she first comes out of the cell, and she has to dry off. And the first thing she does is look around for other queen cells. If there's other queen cells there, she actually stings to death the other queens that are in those cells, so they won't emerge. And it's the only time she does sting. She can sting, but she only stings other queens. She won't sting us, she won't sting anything but the other queens. After her ectoskeleton has dried, about 2 to 3 days, she starts making virgin flights. And she will fly out, and I'm going to drift now a little bit into the drone side of the equation. The drones are the male bees, and they're also a little bit of a special cell. I'll show you in a few moments what the normal worker cell looks like. I may have a drone cell or two on the frame here. But they look like bullets. And the only function of a drone is to mate with a virgin queen. And Tom Seeley at Cornell has done many years studying honeybees, particularly swarming. But one of the things that he and some other researchers have discovered are what's called drone congregation areas, where thousands of drones from a given area will congregate so that when a virgin queen comes to mate, it's less likely she's going to mate with a drone from her own colony. If she does, the eggs that she lays from that coupling will be diphthong eggs, and the bees will destroy them. It's the way that nature takes care of incest in the bee community. And we've learned recently also that when virgin queens are going out, instead of flying up, they've made it about 75 feet in the air, they fly at a much lower height, and they will go under the first drone congregation area to get away from drones that might be from their hive, and go on to the second or third drone congregation area. She will make a total of anywhere from 2 or 3 to maybe 4 or 5 mating flights. She mates with hopefully upwards of 20 drones during the course of this period, because that will be the only sperm that she will have the rest of her life. She never mates again. And if a queen should run out of sperm during the winter, that colony will die in the spring, because there will be no new bees for the spring buildup. Once the queen is mated, a couple, 3 days later, she'll start laying, and she will lay the rest of her life, or until she is superseded, or until the beekeeper decides that he doesn't want her to go on anymore and will remove her and put another queen in. Right now, the queens are laying between 1,500 and 2,000 eggs a day. It's more than their body weight. Don't ask me how, but that they do. The bee population will peak in July, and then will decline as we go in further in the year. One of the things recently we discovered that queens that emerge after the summer solstice are much more likely to successfully take their colony through the winter than queens that are emerging before the summer solstice. Not really sure why. Some of the things that have led to the present crisis, oh wait a minute, I'm getting ahead of myself. I covered the queen, I covered the drones a little bit. The drones, by the way, are cute. They have these big headlight eyes, so they can spot virgin queens in the mating area. And I'm hoping this summer, the beekeeper's picnic is going to be at my farm over in Gorham, and you need a lot of unpaid workers to do this, is to find the drone congregation area near the farm. You suspend a virgin queen in a small cage at the bottom of a helium balloon up about 75 feet, and you wander the fields, and we know certain things. They're never over water, they're never over woods, they're more usually in open areas. And that little tiny cage, you can't hardly see it, but when you hit the drone congregation area, it looks like a football. There's thousands of drones trying to mate with the queen. And I'm hoping to be able to at least locate one of the drone congregation areas. And this is another thing about a drone congregation area. They're the same year to year to year, yet no drones live through the winter. Drones lead a charmed life when they first emerge from their cell. The workers help them out, they feed them honey immediately, As opposed to a worker, when she leaves her cell, her first job is to clean that cell out. And then I know some women say, well, that's always the case, but it's the drones. Once they have mated with the queen, when they pull away from the coupling, their penis pulls off into the queen, and their guts go with it, and they fall to the earth, happy but dead. The drones that are left over that haven't mated with virgin queens, along about the middle to the end of October, the weather is getting colder, and there's no virgin queens flying in the winter, so the drones know that the end is coming. And so they will start hiding because they will be forced out of the colony to starve to death because they're a drain on the stores for the colony during the winter, and the colony needs all the stores it has to get through the winter. And you'll find them in October, early November, up top of the frames, basically hiding because they're going to be forced out. See, they don't have any stingers, and the bees will force them out to starve. You'll see them in the grass very often in October, early November, crawling away from the hive because they've been forced out. However, a friend of mine, Vince McNally, down in Italy Valley, of course, as Peter, you probably know, things are different in Italy Valley. He found a drone on New Year's Day in the top of one of his hives, which I had never known a drone to be live that long. Somebody had to be feeding him, maybe his girlfriend, I'm not sure. But the things that are happening to the honeybees are caused by numerous things. Globalization brought probably one of the worst pest problems that we've had with honeybees in a long time. That's varroa mites. Varroa mites were originally on the Greater East Asian dorsata bee, which is a fairly large bee. They've been there for centuries. The dorsata bees had gotten used to it, and they had a relationship where the mites may have bothered them but didn't kill them. Somewhere in about the late 1980s, early 1990s, the varroa mites made the jump from the Greater East Asian dorsata bee onto the European bee. We think it may have happened in the Philippines. We don't know. Well, when it hit, it was a catastrophe. We lost over 50% of the colonies in New York State in just about a 2-year period. Some of your commercial beekeepers went from, well, Jimmy Doan went from, I think, 6,500 colonies to 500. The losses were staggering. The one thing that we don't understand is normally when you have a parasite, it's again a symbiotic relationship. They'll take from the host, but they don't kill the host. To kill the host, the parasite dies. Well, that's what's happening with the honeybees, with the varroa mites. The varroa mites will weaken the colony so that it will collapse and die, and so will the mites. Now, recently, Sue Colby down in Georgia has noticed that she has found some varroa mites that are non-reproductive. Now, this may be a sign that something is afoot to balance this situation. We're not sure. But right now, varroa mites are the single biggest cause of the problems we have in the honeybee industry. We've had others before. We had colony collapse disorder. That's still out there in some ways, but we believe now that varroa mites may have been also in some way responsible for that. I won't go into the life cycle of varroa mites, but it's almost impossible to control them with what's called IPM, or you're dealing with it without using chemicals. I have not used chemicals, and I get usually 45 to 50% losses. I'm able to make them up usually by splitting my hives, my survivors, in some times as many as 3 out of 1. But a lot of people are using some fairly strong chemicals to control the mites in the colonies. Once you have a load of mites, you'll see things, you'll see deformed bees on the comb. You'll see bees that don't have any wings. You'll see a bee that doesn't have a foot. What happens, the varroa mites, the female mite will jump into the cell before it's sealed and hide under the larvae. And after the bees have sealed it for it to go through its metamorphosis into an adult bee, they will live on the carcass, not the carcass, they'll live on the larvae. The female lays 4 to 5 eggs, the first of which that hatches will be a male, and the rest female, and they will reproduce in this cell and live on the larvae. And that's what causes a deformation of the adult bee emerging from that larvae. There are some ways that we try to control it without chemicals. If you interrupt the brood cycle, if there's no brood, there won't be any varroa. So you take the queen maybe out or cage her for a day or two, so there's a block in the rearing of new brood. Again, though, that affects your bees because you're not going to have the population you need going into winter. But that's one of the big things right now is the control of varroa mites. And because of varroa, they'll weaken a colony and other diseases come in, such as nosema, which is sort of like dysentery or diarrhea. If you see a colony where the outside there's a lot of spotting on the landing board, or even some, I've seen it come down on the front of the hives itself, that's usually nosema ceranae, and it's mainly caused by a spore. But if a healthy hive will throw it off, if they've got varroa, they're not healthy and they won't throw it off, and it's just another problem that the bees are trying to overcome. Pesticides. Pesticides have become a real big problem, particularly with monoagriculture. The neonicotinoid family of pesticides, which basically the name tells a lot about it, it comes from nicotine. And they use it a lot to pre-treat corn before it's planted, pre-treat the corn seeds. The pesticide becomes systemic in the corn itself, the plant. And now the bees don't pollinate corn normally. They will if they can't get anything else, but corn is air pollinated. And the bees will, as I say it, sometimes pollinate corn. But the problem is that that pesticide has entered the soil. And any plant, I'm told, that's planted in that soil for up to 5 years will carry that pesticide. And very often corn is followed by soybeans, which the bees do pollinate. And what happens is it won't affect the adult bee, the adult forager, but they carry this back in the form of nectar and pollen, and it's the developing larvae in the colony, what will be the new bees. That's where the problem is. Gaucho is another name of the same thing. It's a neonicotinoid. Because of the weakness caused by the pesticides, caused by varroa mites, we have the Israeli virus, which is a paralytic virus. We see occasionally the Kashmir virus, and that's a general weakening of the whole colony. Now, what can you do? Well, first of all, if all of you could become beekeepers, it would be great. But I know that's not possible. One of the small successes we've had some years ago now, a group of us got together to see if we could increase beekeeping numbers. At that time, we had a relatively small group, and we put an ad in the Daily Messenger, free beekeeping classes, and we had a meeting at the Cornell Extension Service building on North Main in Canandaigua. And we figured if we got 10 or 15 people, that'd be something. We had actually 47 show up. And it has exploded from there. We now, we have the classes at the, well, we do them they still do them at the Cornell Extension Service, but we have a club now that we have about 150 members in. And I do a beekeeper's newsletter every month that goes out to over 600 people. And it's not, sometimes it's better than others, but there's people out there interested in helping honeybees. Now, not all 600 people are beekeepers. There are people that are interested in things that are going on affecting the bees and the pollinators in general. We can't ignore all of the pollinators. We have to create an atmosphere where they can thrive. Don't use any pesticides on your lawn or your rose bushes. There's an ad on TV that got me so angry, I wrote a letter on it. Do you remember the ad where the guy is, there's this beautiful dandelion, and here's a guy like Wyatt Earp, and he's got Roundup in his pocket, and he pulls it out, and he shoots this beautiful dandelion that's blossoming, and it dies right down to the roots. He's an idiot. The dandelion flow this year was one of the best flows, when I'm speaking of flow, a nectar flow, that we've ever had. The bees were out there working dawn to dusk, and we have flows before that, starting with skunk cabbage and the willow trees, the maple trees. But the dandelion flow is the first really significant flow we get. And to think that somebody is going to go out there and deliberately kill a dandelion, I have to admit, it makes me very angry.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.